You're listening to the Small and Supercharged podcast with Ria Freeman, episode 139. Well, welcome to this episode of the Small and Supercharged podcast. It's a solo with me, and it is all about how to pitch to be on a podcast. And this isn't necessarily inviting everyone to pitch to be on the podcast, just for the record. But there are loads of amazing podcasts out there in the world, and they're podcasts that everyone can appear on. So again, don't think I'm saying everybody pitch to me, but also I'm not saying don't pitch to me. Strong start, okay? But I wanted to record this podcast because I receive a lot of emails asking to be on the podcast. And to be clear, these are from people that I've never heard of before. These are from people that have seen how the podcast is charting and want to be on it, or have a client they want to be on it. And there is a real theme amongst them all. Well, there are a number of themes amongst them all, which is why the answer will always be no. Unless, it's like, someone incredibly famous, but actually that's not what it is. And as I go through these here, I think that there are a lot of things when you're pitching to be on someone's podcast, when you are trying to get onto someone's platform, and if you're pitching to them versus if you're asking them. So if I'm asking somebody because I think they are going to be amazing, they're going to add loads of value, my audience is going to love it, I don't necessarily expect them to do all of these. They're definitely nice to haves. But if someone is pitching to me and they're trying to make me do something, and to be clear, like the podcast recording process, although I love it, I'm recording this just after doing a podcast recording with somebody for an episode in January, and I love it. I really enjoy it. When you speak to someone who's, inspiring, interesting, ticks all the boxes, it's really a fun thing to do. But it would be wrong for me to say there's not a time implication, because there is, not only the podcast recording, but thinking back with some of the ones that I've recorded, there's a lot of to and fro to try and get our kind of diaries to align, which is not always that easy. There is obviously the getting the image beforehand, getting all the social posts scheduled around it. So there's a time factor there. There's also a money factor. So not only am I using my time to record the podcast, which I'm very happy to do. None of this is a moan at all, but it's just explaining before I go into how to pitch to be on a podcast and actually how not to. Why it can be a little bit insulting when someone you've never heard of in your whole life just emails you out the blue and just assumes you're going to say yes. I mean, I don't even reply. And you know how I reply to emails? I try to. So there's obviously the time implication, but there's also the money implication. So when I record a podcast, I use Zoom, and I pay for Zoom because I do. And if I do a podcast with more than one person, there's a time limit if I don't pay for it. So I have a paid for package on Zoom, which I use for other things as well. Then I record it, which is fine. Then I store it on my paid for Dropbox due to the size of the stuff I have on Dropbox. And then I pay for it to be edited because I want it to be as good as it can be. And then I upload it onto the hosting platform that I also pay for. And I don't mind any of these things, but when you're thinking that you're going to pitch to a podcast, keep in mind that it does cost that person time and money. It will definitely cost them time. They may do their own editing. They may not use Dropbox or Zoom. They may not have a paid for podcast hosting provider. So it may be a time factor rather than a time and money one. But there is a cost. And therefore, if you take one thing away from this whole podcast, it's if you're pitching to be on someone's podcast, think of the value that you can offer. So I've got 6 key points that are going to help you be successful if you are pitching to be on a podcast. And these are things that really matter to me. So the first thing is show knowledge of the podcast, show knowledge of the audience and what it's about. And you can do this in lots of different ways. I think And I have had some that have done this. I have had some pitches that have done this and I've still said no. Because they haven't met the other criteria. But show knowledge of the podcast, not just where it's ranked. I see your podcast and I'd really like to be on it because I'm amazing. Well, cheers, thanks a lot. That doesn't help me. If you want to basically pitch yourself to my audience with really no value there, it's not going to work for me. So what about my podcast and about the audience and about the people that I like to help works for you? So something like, I've been a regular listener of the Small and Supercharged podcast. I really love your audience. I'm an equestrian by heart, or I used to ride when I was younger, or I can see the issues that the equestrian rural sector are dealing with and feel I can help in some way with that. So the first thing is show knowledge of the podcast, of who it's pitching to, of what it's about, of the kind of tone, of the takeaways. Show some knowledge here, because to me, if someone just says, "Oh, I've seen your podcast," never get the name wrong. Never get the name wrong. Don't call it, the Small and Super podcast or something like that, because instantly I'm thinking, you have not even got the first detail right. So show knowledge of the podcast, and that should be more than just its chart position, because I know its chart position. Everyone can find that out. But have you listened to it? Do you know what it's about? Do you know who I'm trying to provide information for? The next thing is reference at least one episode. So if you're saying, I really love your podcast, say, I could really relate to episode or when you interviewed such and such. And I thought their point about X was a really interesting one. That's something that I teach quite a lot as well. Make sure you have actually listened to the podcast. And that is not just something you should reference in your pitch, but reference it. Actually do it. Do the work so you can do the reference. Don't just pick a few and listen to a couple of minutes. Listen to it, because also if you are aligning your brand with their podcast, you want to make sure that it is the right kind of podcast for your brand. Not just that millisecond was, oh yeah, I could get on in that because, got a big audience. Make sure that the podcast and the content are relevant by listening to a few episodes before you pitch to be on them. It's really, really a very, again, it's a basic thing, but it's a thing that most people don't do. And from the pitches that I've had, from the people that have emailed me, I would honestly reckon, actually, I could remember one that's mentioned a specific episode and actually talked about it in a way that makes me know that they have listened to it. The rest seem to avoid this point, and it really winds me up, because I think, how can you want to be on something that you don't know anything about? Thinking about how the Small and Supercharged Facebook group works, we sometimes have people asked to join the group and they think it's about cars because of the supercharged element. And when they fill in the questions, they're talking to me about the turbocharger on their car, which is interesting. I don't know anything about turbochargers at all, actually, but that's by the by. So if someone's looked at the podcast and thought, oh yeah, small, high-powered cars, this isn't the podcast for them. So listen to it, do the homework before you pitch, and also then when you pitch, reference something that you've heard, something that you've enjoyed, something that you've listened to, something that's made you think. Even better and actionable, something that you have taken action on from listening to a podcast. That's an easy win. So showing knowledge and referencing an episode. Now, another thing is making sure you are connected before you actually go in for the ask. So make sure you're following these people on social media. Make sure you're engaging with their content. You're liking, you're commenting, you're maybe sending them a DM when they've put up a nice post on their stories. Because if you do that a few times in a genuine and authentic way, when you do make that ask, I know from my point of view, I'm a lot more likely to even read to the bottom of the email and consider it. Because I know that you've actually done the work. You have seen what I'm talking about. You've seen what kind of things, what kind of comments my fans and followers leave, depending on obviously whether it's a page or an account or where you've picked me up. You've done the work, which means that your name or your handle will be in my head. So even if I couldn't remember exactly who it was, I will have clocked it somewhere and it will have gone into my mind, which means that I can actually recall that. When I see your name, I'll think that rings a bell. And even with people with much bigger accounts than I've got, you may need, do it, put the work in, follow that person, engage with their content. You're also doing it so you can look at their audience. You can look at the content that they put out to their audience and see what you can actually provide that's going to be of value to their audience. Because if you're not going to be of value to their audience, and this is a point a little bit further down, actually that's the next point, spoiler alert, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. So again, taking the Smaller Supercharged podcast as an example, obviously we have, there's a solo show like this one, and then every other week there is an interview. And I have a range of people in the interviews. I have influencers, I have small businesses in the equestrian and rural space. I do also have some people from beyond the equestrian and rural space who have got value they can really share with you, people that I've admired, people that have done really good things that translate well to this space. But it's important that they do translate well to this space, and you can work that out by following the accounts for the podcast that you want to be on, because you can see the content they're putting up, you can see the recurring themes, you can look at the engagement from their audience, and you can see what content is proving to be really valuable for them, which actually means that when you pitch, you're much better informed, and it also shows you are taking a real interest in them. So connect on social before you ask, follow and engage. Again, to quote good old Gary Vee, jab, 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 right hook. Being on someone's podcast means that they've got to put a time and a financial effort in your direction. So if you're doing that, the least you can do, they've got to back you with their time and their money, is make sure that you're actually connecting with them, that you're showing that you're interested, and you're doing things that are really positive for them before you make an ask. It really does go a long way. The next point, which you'd think would be an obvious one, is what value are you going to bring to the podcast? What are you going to help my audience with? And obviously this doesn't just apply to my podcast, but any podcast that you are thinking, oh, I'd love to be on that. What can you bring to that audience that is different, but also aligns perfectly? So I've had pitches from people where they have genuinely said, let's say John, my name's John and I'd like to be on your podcast. This, and then the next thing is basically, this is why I'm amazing. And then there are just bullet point after bullet point or paragraph after paragraph about how amazing John is. Now, I'm sure John is a rock star. I'm sure he's a lovely bloke, but there's nothing in what he said that is of interest to me from a podcast point of view. I'm not asking him for a CV. If he says, I'm an award-winning, I'm an award-winning accountant. I'm an award-winning motivational speaker, and I work with, let's go for the motivational speaker one. I'm an award-winning motivational speaker. I work with amazing entrepreneurs all over the UK and beyond to help them become more confident in public speaking. Great, that's good. I can see his credentials there. I don't need his whole CV, because this is your intro. This is you saying, this is what I can do. Are you interested? I don't need to know where you were born and how heavy you were, because it's not relevant to this initial thing where I'm saying, maybe, maybe not. So don't tell me all that stuff. I don't need to know. Pitch it with basic. For me, if someone said to me, I'm an award-winning public speaker, I've done 5 TEDx talks, I've done a TED talk, and I coach people, I coach entrepreneurs on how to be a better public speaker. And this is how I think, based on everything I know about your audience, that I can bring to the table. I can help them talk to people in a variety of different settings, because I know that from listening to your podcast and looking at your social media that a lot of your fans and followers are horsey. So perhaps you've got quite a few instructors in your audience, and I can help them to feel more confident speaking to groups of people. I can appreciate that you've got quite a lot of small business owners, and if they're feeling unconfident about speaking to groups of people, whether that's to pitch an idea that they want investment for, or to speak to colleges, groups of students at conventions, I can help them with that. Now that would be of interest to me, rather than John. Are we still on John? Let's say we are, saying, I've spoken at this conference, this conference, this conference, this conference, this conference. Well, all that's telling me is that he can speak at conferences, which I kind of hope he could if that's what he does. But if he's adding value, if he's saying, I'm going to help your audience get better at this, 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 and this, that's interesting to me, because I work really hard with the podcast to make sure that every time you put your earpods in or your earphones or play it through your computer, there's something that you take away that you can either learn, you can go and apply that and learn something, or you're really inspired by. If someone's giving me their CV, I have got no clue what they're going to deliver. And when when you've arranged a recording with somebody, you kind of want to deliver whatever you record in a format. So it's not of interest to have someone's CV. It's interesting to start with I'm an X and think, oh, interesting, because what you can then do is, good old Google. I'll Google John if I'm interested. And when I go back to him and say, actually, this sounds really cool. I've seen on your website that you've also done this, this, and this. It'd be quite cool to reference those as you talk about how you've been on the journey and the biggest stages you've spoken to, things like that. All in on that. But I don't need your full CV on an introductory meeting. I need to know concisely why you should be doing this. What are your credentials? But more importantly, what value are you bringing? Because if you're not bringing any value, I'm not really interested. And this sounds like such a harsh podcast, doesn't it? And I don't mean it to. I'm genuinely trying to help you, because if you want to make some really good pitches to other people's podcasts, this stuff will help you massively. It really, really will. And none of this is rocket science, but it's perhaps stuff that it's useful looking at it from my point of view, or from a podcast founder, creator, recorder, whatever's point of view. Because the volume of pitches that we get, if you want to shine, you need to get to the point quite quickly, and you need to really think about the audience and what you're going to deliver. The next thing is, tell me how you're going to promote it. Because obviously there's loads of reasons why you have guests on the podcast. For me, the value that they deliver to my audience, to you lovely lot, is the first priority, and it's really important. And I would take that over the next step any day of the week, because it's really important. But if you're pitching for someone's space on the podcast, and keep in mind that I have got a maximum of, I was going to say 26, but it's not actually, because usually in December I do a Podmas or something like that. So I've got a maximum of about 24 slots in the year that I need to have people for interviews. Keep in mind, I'm recording this just before Christmas 2020, and I have already recorded 3 for next year, and I have got another 1 sorted. So I'm already 4 in, so I only need 20 more for the entire year. So just to put that in perspective, I don't need a lot of these spaces. So if you're pitching to come on the podcast, tell me how you're going to help me promote it. Are you going to share it with your Facebook, Instagram? Do you want to do a blog about it? Do you want to do a live with me about it? Would you like some of the audio clips, which I can sort? I can send you the edited version so you can take some clips out. I can even get some clips taken out for you if you're going to use them. Obviously, in a perfect world, you wouldn't necessarily pitch with, here's something I'd like to do, it's a lot more work for you. But if you said, is it okay if I record a few snippets when the podcast is out from that recording to promote it? I'd say, yeah, crack on, knock yourself out, amazing, thank you so much. But are you going to promote it on your socials? Are you going to send it out to your newsletter list? How are you going to promote it? what are you going to do that's going to help the podcast and what you've spoken about get out to more people? And that would be sharing it with your audience. And if that's the case, tell me the size of your audience. Is your audience engaged? Where's your biggest audience? How are you going to do it for them? That is, again, really interesting. And I'm not expecting you to promote it, every day for a week. But really, it would be great for you to promote it, because although obviously the podcast would then be introduced to your audience, which is a big plus for me, you are promoting your expertise, you're sharing your skills and your knowledge and your amazingness. Why wouldn't you want to share that with your audience, When we do a joint podcast, it's not like we're talking about me at all. I don't really say much on the joint podcast, which is lovely, probably for you as well. I try and steer people towards things that I think are going to add real value for you and tell that story. So for me, that's what I really want to do. So if you're talking a lot, share it and tell me how you're going to do that. Because again, that's a real kind of cherry on the top job. If we've got everything else ticked and you're saying, I'm also going to promote it, I'm really active on LinkedIn, I've got this many connection on LinkedIn, and this is what I'm going to do, and if you would like to come and do a live with me or send me a video clip or something like that, I can absolutely use that. But if not, I'm going to do this, and this. Love it. Really, really helpful as a podcast producer to have someone who's saying, I'm going to actively promote my involvement as well. Brilliant. Massive tick in the box there. And obviously with a decent audience, all the better. And the last one, again, this is a kind of cherry on the top of the icing on the cake, is show that you know me. Do you say something that implies you know me? And you'll get to know me through my social posts. So again, if you've done what I've said, if you've connected on social media, if you've kept an eye on those accounts. And it can just be the tone of voice. So, if someone asked me how I was coping with the kids at Christmas, I'd know that they knew that I had children. It just shows a connection, which is a little bit deeper than what can they get from you. It's actually more of they've taken an interest. Because although the podcast might be seen as the kind of goal, perhaps, it could actually be just the start. So there are people that I've recorded podcasts with in the past, and the podcast is great, and it's such a joy to have them on. But actually our relationship has developed from that. There are additional things that we've worked together on, additional things we'll work together on in the future. And if you're showing that you know me, and even if it's just obviously through our social media, we reveal so much about ourselves. So obviously, how are you coping with the kids at Christmas? Are the children getting on well at school? Anything, or hair related with me. I get quite a lot of hair related comments, DMs actually, because obviously it's a bit wild. I talk about that a bit. Or Marilyn the Super Cob. Just, it doesn't have to be stalker level, but a comment that shows that something that has happened you've connected with on my social, that has lodged in your memory. Maybe a tip I put out, or maybe something like that you've kind of said, oh yeah, that really helped me, I tried that. Or that's an interesting thing, I use this scheduling tool. And it just shows that you've taken things on board about me and what I do, is a real it's a cherry on the top of the icing on the cake. It is the kind of pinnacle. But the crucial ones from this whole list are showing knowledge of the podcast, connecting on social before you ask, telling me what you can offer to my listeners is brilliant. That has got to be, I should have put these in some kind of order, but I think that to kind of get your foot in the door, showing knowledge of the podcast and referencing it is really positive. Then following in with that, what can you offer my listeners? Why are you different from everyone else that's approached me this week? Is really important. And then the other things are definitely connecting on social before you ask means you're more likely to get your foot in the door, because I'm more likely to consider you as not just a mass mailing that I've got on. because sometimes it can feel like that. And this isn't, I know I keep saying me, and this isn't about me. This is about any podcast that you want to go on. But to be quite honest, this would work for anything that you wanted to collab with. If you want to collaborate with somebody, whether you want to do a video with them or something that gets you on their platforms, because this is what it is. It's you getting on their platform. So whether it's a social media platform, whether it's their blog platform, whether it's a podcast platform, whatever platform it's on, you've got to be courteous because they've really worked hard. They've put in the blood, the sweat, the tears, the money to build that platform up. So for you just to think you can waltz in there isn't particularly realistic or respectful. So think of pitching for a podcast like thinking of pitching for any collaboration. You want to get to know them, and not just from a politeness point of view, but so they align with your audience. So when you share the podcast on your platforms, your audience are going to find it useful too, because if they don't, that's not great either. So I hope that's helped. And as I said, it's not just how to be on my podcast. I think that all of this stuff will help you enormously on how to be on anyone's podcast that you want to be on. I really, really do. And actually, anyone that you want to work with in whatever format, these things will help you because they'll help you get in the front door. They'll help you to make those connections. And even if the answer is still no, you have still made a positive connection with them. You have still, they will still remember that name or think, oh yeah, I spoke to such and such. And whether that means an opportunity comes up in the future where you could work together with them, you could go on their podcast, or you pitch again in a few months' time when you've had a really relevant idea, brilliant. Not all these things will happen overnight because I know I record, as I said, if I've recorded 4 episodes, I'm actually 2 months into the year already. So it might be that I've done the next kind of set of bookings and I'm not working on anything yet. Or it might be that we can do something now, or it might be that I've just done something quite similar, or I've recorded something quite similar that you haven't heard yet. And I don't want those to be next to each other because then I like the variety and the flexibility. So there's a few different ways to look at it. But I hope that's helped you. Let me know how you get on. If you do pitch, let me know how it gets on. I would love to know that. As always, if you listen, please do screenshot and share to stories. I would love to know if you are listening. And also, I just wanted to give a little bit of a shout out because I know I spoke about Podmas, and this is January, so we are done with Podmas, but it is still available to listen to. But the people on that were members of the Small and Supercharged group, so I thought that would be a great time just to chat about that. And especially as 2021, obviously we've had 2020, which was a little bit challenging, let's put it mildly. And if you are really looking to accelerate your business in 2021, to grow it, to get more confidence, to really up your digital skills that, let's be honest, in 2020 have quite literally saved people's businesses, then do have a look at the Small and Supercharged Mastermind group. This is a monthly membership group. It's an application-only group, and that just helps me get to find out a bit more about you, about what you want to learn about, and to make sure that you're going to be happy and get the maximum value out of the group. Inside the group, there is an incredible community. We do monthly masterclasses. There is a live every week. There is a social media critique for once a month for one member that goes inside the group for everyone to learn from. And I also put lots of opportunities in there, and lots of opportunities are created through the community of the group. And that is £40 per calendar month, but you are not tied in for any amount of time. It's just done through PayPal recurring payment. But to find out more about that, just nip over to riafreemanpr.co.uk, and if you go up to the top menu, Small and Supercharged Mastermind is up there. It would be amazing to have you in. The stories that the incredible group members tell me about how they're doing well just fill my heart, and the community over there is just incredible. So I'm going to head off for today, but thank you so much for joining, and we'll catch up next week with an interview. Have a great day.